Hi everyone, welcome back to Desert Isle Forge. My name is Tim. In today's video we're going to look at slit and drift holes. Before we get started, I would like to give a shout out to Vaughn. Vaughn is the owner of Three Rivers Forge in Greensville, South Carolina. Vaughn sent me this t-shirt and I would like to ask you to go and support his Facebook page and Etsy store. Give him some love. He's a longtime supporter of my channel. Thanks, Vaughn. So this technique is used to create holes in materials, and as the name suggests, it's made out of two steps. The first step is to cut the material, creating a division in the mass, and then the second step is to drive a punch through, create a distance between the two halves, forming the hole to make room for the material that's passing through this piece. When we compare the slit and drift hole with a punched hole, the difference is obvious. You see more bulging out on the sides. That's because instead of losing a piece of material, we are dividing the mass and pushing it to the side. That leads me to the advantages of this technique versus punching. Number one is strength. Because of what I just explained, no loss of material, the material is the same, and therefore it's much stronger. Number two is versatility. We can use much more different shapes and sizes of this hole. Also, we can use much larger sections go through this material because we don't lose, and we can go past the thickness of this and creating a larger hole. Also, the aesthetic value is added. You can use this technique as part of your design, and it makes a very nice forged looking finish. The cons, if there are any, is that it's a more complex technique involving more tools and more steps and more heat. The tools we need to complete this technique is hot cut chisels and drift punches, and also I always use a sacrificial plate to protect my anvil. To demonstrate the basics of this technique, I'm gonna slit and drift a hole through this 1 inch by 1/4 inch flat stock and create a hole for a 1/2 inch material, round material. I'm using this 5/8 wide hot chisel, and I'm gonna use my round drift punch and a 3-pound hammer. You want to use something a heftier hammer to have enough force behind your strikes to punch it through easily. I marked the material on both sides, but when I'm cutting a thinner material like this, I just like to cut from one side, but when I'm cutting something thicker, I'm going from either side. So I'm going to try to punch all the way through from one side, and then flip it over, clear the hole, and then I drive my drift punch through it. So we heated our materials to 4 inch temperature and bring the chisel, strike down and drive all the way. Then flip it over quickly and punch right through. Now we have a little bird there. Normally I remove the plate and place it over the hardy hole and just cut that little burr out, so it won't be in the way when we are drifting. Straighten everything up, give another heat, and come and drive our drift punch through. So here's the second heat, and just put the punch in there, and I'm moving from corner to corner on the hardy hole because the punch will push material down. And occasionally I like to flip it around and push it back to have a more flat or even hole. Now I mark the punch at where it reaches 1/2 inch thickness, so I know roughly how deep the punch has to go in. But keep in mind, when the material is hot, it will be larger, the hole, and as it cools down, it shrinks. And now with the third heat, I'm flipping the bar over, and I'm going in with the punch from the side where it was coming out. That way we push back that bulging out material, make everything flat, and check our bar. Now it's a bit loose in it, but when it cools down, it's going to be more tight. Again, the straightening, making everything nice and flat. Alright, so this was the basics of slit and drift holes. This technique is very useful to create more hand-forged look of any project. If you're making a simple grill, just use this technique to create the holes, feed the round bar through it, and there you go, you have a really nice hand-forged look. Quickly recap a few things. When you cut the material on a thinner one, I normally make most of the cut from one side, and then flip it over and cut that little thin material and removing the burr that way. If I'm working on thicker, I go halfway from one side, then flip halfway from the other side. That way the burr will be in the middle. Also, when you do the drifting, you want to move around the corners of the hardy hole unless you have a specific sized hole like a swage block that is close to the size you're making. This way you will prevent somewhat of the flaring out of the bottom. When you're doing when you finish the cut and you're going to the drifting portion, when you reheat the material, because we divided the mass, the material won't transfer heat. So we have to be mindful of that when we reheat the material, not to place it like this, because then only the bottom will be heated and won't transfer the heat to the top, or very slowly. So when you do that, you have to turn your material, make sure everything is nice and hot all the way through. And finally, do not get discouraged if your first try doesn't turn out as well as you want it to. Even me, I do a few practice runs before I go on the final piece if I haven't done this technique for a while. Next, I'm going to demonstrate this technique on a square bar, creating a hole that is big enough to receive a bar that is identical to the bar we're going through. For the next demonstration, I'm using this 5/8 by 5/8 square bar, and I'm making a hole that will receive another 5/8 by 5/8 square bar. I'm using a hot chisel, a round drift punch, and a square drift punch. So here we go. Material heated up, and going from one side, about halfway in, trying to keep the chisel going towards the center of the mass. It's gonna wander, that's normal, but you have to kind of guide it. Flipping over. If you need another heat, give another heat. I will have to give it another heat too. And this is kind of the more difficult part of the project, or the process. So with another heat, we're going to cut through now. Just drive it in and flip it again. You're always going to have a little burr inside because it's impossible to cut everything perfectly in the center, and you want to keep that little burr kind of in the center or in the middle of the thickness. Right there, I'm going to give another heat and just open it up a little bit more with the chisel. So with the last heat, I'm just gonna open this up a little bit. Normally you can do it one heat or maybe two heats, but because I'm filming and explaining and all that stuff, I'm not really very efficient at forging right now. So we opened up our hole here. This is large enough to accept the drift punch now. Before I go to the next step, I always straighten everything up, make everything in centered and aligned. So here we go, driving the punch through, going from corner to corner, keep everything nice and flat, and occasionally flipping around because our punch is tapered. Make sure that the heat is even on each side of the material, so we don't have one side stretching more than the other. And now with the square punch, make sure that the orientation of your square punch is correct. Otherwise, you will have crooked holes. And from the other side. So here we are, we finished with the square drift punch, this one at least. I went all the way through, and this was not big enough to accommodate this 5/8 by 5/8, but because I want a snug fit, and also I don't like this rounded shape. If you like that, that's fine. I'm gonna use this parallel punch and drive this in. This is the same width as my bar that's going through, and I'm gonna punch it in, open up the hole a little bit, and flatten the sides. For me, aesthetically, that's a little bit nicer look. If you want to leave it round and just want to have a looser hole, you can use a larger square punch and open up the hole. But I like to have a snug fit, and also like to have these sides a little bit more. So flat. Here we go, hopefully with the last heat, and I have my parallel punch and just driving in, and then placing it on the anvil and flattening the sides a little bit. Then back and driving it through. Now I like this look a little bit more, and when it cools down, it's gonna shrink down a little bit, so it's gonna be a tight fit. And all I have to do, if the bar doesn't go through it, just to run the file a little bit and then open up just a hair. I think the corners are not quite as sharp, but a little bit of filing will make it nice. So here we go, the finished hole, square bar through square bar, same size. I opened it up with the file a little bit, so it's sliced freely now. I'm pretty happy with this, how it turned out. It's not perfect, but I haven't done this thing for quite a long time. What I would have done differently is make the slit part, the cutting, a little bit shorter, because I have a little bit of a gap here, and that's the result of the slit being too long. So next I'm going to show you how to do this, apply this technique to a round bar. So to demonstrate how to do a slit and drift on the round bar, I'm using this 3/4 inch solid round. First step, I marked where the cut is going to go. The first step is to just slightly flatten this area, creating a landing for our chisel. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to keep it, preventing it from rolling and punching through. So this is one of the most difficult tasks, to punch this, especially alone. If you have somebody helping you, holding it while you're doing it, that's better, but you have to make sure that you're driving the punch in towards the center of the mass. Otherwise, it can wander off sideways and create an uneven split. The first step is to create that low flat area for the landing of the chisel, and then starting to punch the hole, making sure that the strike is going towards the center of the mass. And then, as with all thicker material, I'm gonna punch it from either side, from both sides. Okay, back on the other side, a little flat, and then cutting from this side. It still rolls around a little bit, but it's good. Driving all the way through, and yeah, this is the most difficult, the round section, because it's going to roll around. If you have somebody helping you to hold it, just ask them. And with the final heat, you're going to punch right all the way through. There we go. Here we go. As I said, the round is the most difficult because of the rolling effect. And this little burr, you're gonna remove it. There you go. Nice. So if you don't have anybody to help you to hold the bar, you can create a little contraption. Like this is just a piece of angle bar, and it kind of by friction slows down the rolling. It's not preventing it 100%. It's not as effective as somebody holding it, but it's pretty good. And finally we get the drift punch and punch the round hole. This is going to be for a 1/2 inch round stock going through this 3/4 inch round. Nice. Now make sure everything's straight and parallel. So here it is, the round bar slit and drifted to create a hole that accepts a 1/2 inch round. Perhaps this was the most difficult, especially the slitting part. The drifting part was okay, but because of the rolling and all that stuff. I'm going to splice in a few pictures that's showing these punched holes in some of the projects that I utilized them, and then we come back for some final words. So this is the end of today's video. I hope you learned something interesting and new today and helped you become a better blacksmith. If you'd like to support my channel, please subscribe, like, share, and comment. If you'd like to check my website, it's www.desertoutforge.com. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.